That's it. Now, anything you say shall be taken down and twisted music used against you. Hello, Belinda Kirk.
Hi, Matt. Nice to see you again.
And you. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about?
Yes. Well, I love adventure. It's probably the sort of single thing about me. For about 30 years, which makes me feel very old, I've been leading adventures all over the world. Some big ones, a lot of international expeditions, and also lots of small adventures in Britain. Although I say small, but more close to home ones. So I've been leading groups into the wilderness for a long time, and what I'd noticed and what I personally experienced was that I found adventuring like a way of living. I found it was my therapy, and I saw that it was other people's. And I always wondered for a long time why we didn't sort of celebrate this. We didn't really recognize it in our society. So I did, over the last sort of decade, I've been doing a lot of research into psychology, into evolutionary psychology, outdoor education, all sorts of different disciplines, and pulling together an argument, and really out of curiosity initially, because I wanted to understand why it's so effective. And then I wanted to communicate it to people. So I've spent 30 years sort of witnessing it, and another sort of decade nearly, just reading around and learning about it. And what I do now is try to communicate that, really, and try to help people that work in that area or volunteer in that area to do it more, to get more funding, to do it better. So I've set up something called Adventure Mind, which is what I'm trying to make into an alliance, but it started as a conference, really, to bring scientists together, to try to convince them to do more research in this area, because it was like, we need more evidence in this area to help in different ways, to help with funding, to help with practice, evidence-based practice, and so on. So I basically work in all sorts of ways to try to get this message out, and to try and help people that do it. So I've also written a book, which is called Adventure Revolution, but its name's about to be changed to Adventure Mind. So it's coming out imminently as Adventure Mind. Okay. Because people were enjoying the book, which is great, and recommending it, which is a great honor, but not always understanding what it was. It didn't say what it was on the tin when people hadn't heard of it already. So I'm going to America with that this year now. We're in the new year, and with a new name to the book. So yeah, Adventure Mind is really what I do. The book, the alliance I'm trying to build. There's a research panel, a grant, all sorts of things to try and promote adventure for mental health and for well-being. There's a long answer.
What are you doing tomorrow?
Well, I also hang out with my son, and that's my most important job. He's 6, and we have a lot of adventures together.
Yes, well, we're both in that boat, aren't we? We had a conversation at the last Adventure Mind conference. So go on then. So we've talked about homeschooling. So how do you balance, in a kind of, I kind of say that we don't have a problem with divergence or neurodivergence. What we've got is a problem with social convergence and social and economic convergence. It's very kind of narrow perspective. How do you cope with doing all this adventuring and homeschooling and work in general and earning a living, I suppose?
I'd love you to clarify exactly what you mean by social and sort of convergent stuff. So come back to that.
Yeah.
But the way I see parenting is kind of simple. I'm an older parent, so it's easier to be more decisive, I suppose, when you've got some decades behind you. And also I've done a lot of living, and this is a chapter. So if I had been a parent for the first time in my 20s, I think I would have found it very, very... There's my son. Good.
That happens to me all the time. Matthew, come and say hello.
Can you shut the door? See you in a minute, darling. Uh,
I know that's what it's all about, isn't
his
it?
cue, his cue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see this as a chapter.
Oh, hold on.
I'm
Here's mine.
oh, disappearing. He's like the invisible child, in and out.
Oh, buzz off.
um, I see this as a chapter. I'm only going to get this one chance, and I never really understood parenting until I became a parent. I don't think you can really. And it's just a gift. It's such a gift, and every day is so exhausting and frustrating, but it's so magical and wonderful, and I don't want to miss it. So I work part-time. I've always put work first. I've always been obsessed about my work, whether I got paid for it or not. I always, all my volunteering work as well as my paid work,
Yeah.
I see it the same. I love it. I'm passionate about it, and it always overwhelmed, I think, what I do, everything else, but every other part of my life. But with child, it's very easy. Or it's been easier for me to see. I've got a 10-year window maybe to spend a lot of time with him, and then as he gets older, as he becomes
Yeah.
a teenager and stuff, I'm going to get less. I'm just going to be a taxi service. So, and more important than that. But this is my time for time, and time is all you get, isn't it? It's all you
Yeah.
get. So,
Very precious.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're just getting by. We're just getting by. As long as we can get by financially, we're not. You have to just make a financial choice that you're going to get by, rather than increase your salary or increase your income or save or anything else. It's not for now.
Okay. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of those points. So where did it start though? What kind of triggered this thing of being adventurous? How was your childhood? Was there something in your childhood that said, right, I'm going to be adventurous?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I was born in the 70s, grew up in the late 70s, 80s. So, and also I grew up on the Channel Islands in the first sort of 10 years. So I had a very free early childhood in some ways, in that there was that kind of you'd go out in the morning and you'd be back by dinner time, by dark, or when the street lights came on or whatever.
Yeah.
That was kind of normal back then, which is not obviously normal today. And so freedom, adventurousness, testing your boundaries, finding out what you're capable of, becoming resilient, becoming resourceful, was all part of was just much more of a normal thing. And because I was on an island, there was less traffic and there was less stranger danger. And so I think it was particularly freeing. And I had a lot of freedom. I'm not saying that's everything. It's not the only part of childhood that's important, but it definitely gave me an adventurous, resilient kind of start. And I think the other really big key was my grandfather, who was he was a zoologist and had worked all over Africa, and was a very kind and humble man, and very loving, kind man. And his stories ignited something in me. The first place I went when I was 18 was Africa, and that was because of him and his stories and his kindness over the years. So I think he was probably, he did amazing things. That there's so many amazing, you'll know them as well, Murph. There are so many amazing people out there doing such incredible things. They don't all have social media accounts. They don't all write books about it because they're too busy doing it.
Yeah.
My granddad would, he walked across which the Kalahari Desert, maybe. I'm trying to remember, or the Namib Desert, or one of the big deserts over that side of Africa, with a Sam Bushman. Just him and a Sam Bushman. He walked just for fun. Like, he just did that one time, and he did stuff like that. And he studied gorillas and loads of cool stuff as well as a zoologist. So yeah, he gave me a passion for finding out the rest of the world.
Very good. Yeah. So you've mentioned resilience a few times, and you've gone towards this adventure mind thing where, okay, it ties in with a lot of stuff that I'm interested in at the moment. You know, mental toughness. I did a workshop for you on that side of things at the last conference. So why is, I mean, it's the mental health side of it. Can you explain why, give us some insights as to why it is good for mental health? And, you know, yeah, just start with that one first. Why is it good for mental health?
Yeah. So that's a how long have you got? um, so
How long have you
I
got? Yeah.
literally I spent um I spent years out of curiosity researching what I was witnessing. This idea that I could see adventures, both big and small, being impactful on people, both in the short term and long term. You know, their
Mm,
long term mental health and well being, and um and and dug around into all these different disciplines. What I've done is written a 200 and I don't know what is it 250-page book about why adventure is good for well-being. I would sum it up though, since we've not got 5 hours. I think chosen challenge, which is how I um, define adventure. It's about choosing challenges in nature. Chosen challenges in nature give us the chance to build uh, all the sort of personal growth things. So that the obvious, or the first thing that I think I started talking and reading about was about comfort zones and leaving your comfort zone and the stretch comfort zone model, that whole part of psychology, and this idea that you can find out what you're capable of, um, and that by leaving your comfort zone, it's very important because you essentially find out what you're capable of, and also you find out what you're capable that you're capable of bearing, and that by taking on things that scare you or stretching yourself outside what everyday life and what is normal to you and comfortable to you, if you decide to step into the uncomfortable, you actually get these wonderful gifts back. And there's this feedback loop of positive emotions, confidence, resilience, and all of these sorts of things. So a big part of it is that idea of of finding out what you're capable of, stretching yourself and finding your resilience and like stretching those muscles,
mm,
stretching your resilience muscle and so on. So there's a lot to say around that, but essentially that's one big area. I think also there's the relationships. I think it's a wonderful way to build relationships. If you are doing a chosen challenge together, you are learning to trust people. You're learning to um, rely on each other, and you're bound together in this shared goal. And it
mm.
doesn't even matter if you get to the top of whatever mountain or to the end of
Yeah,
the river or whatever.
yeah,
But you make progress together. You help each other. You learn about each other. You have totally different conversations with people when you're walking up a hill or having a campfire together than you would um, around the water cooler in your office. You might work with people for years and not really know anything about them. You can't really over a coffee in the ask them about what their greatest hopes and dreams and
yeah.
about, I don't know, trauma from childhood. Whereas you can have those conversations. They naturally come out when you're outdoors, when you're experiencing something physically together. So I think there's relationships, there's flow states and that whole kind of peak performance side of things, that sort of transcendent side of things.
Yeah.
You don't have to be doing base jumping for that. You can do that in stuff that's not death defying, I believe.
Mm,
I mean, there's so much to say. Uh, I think so much of, I mean, I think there's so many things I could say, but one thing I would say, because so I won't go on for too long, is what's really interesting to me is around, I think society, it's particularly good now because society is we're anti taking responsibility for ourselves. That it's very anti taking risks or taking, it's all very much about blaming others. It's all very much about, it's not my fault and I don't want to take it's, we don't lean into trouble, into challenge.
mm,
Society tells us to not lean into challenge, but to kind of lean away. And I think I mean, I'm a very naturally anxious person, and a lot of, and this isn't just my say so. This is lots of other top psychologists say so as well. I can quote some books if you want. A lot of what we talk about around anxiety and so on is around things like triggers and this sort of thing. We shouldn't be worried. Well, we should be worried about triggers, and I don't want to discount people's experience, because we're all different and we all have a different lived experience. But actually, at some point, I know that my anxiety is much worse if I lean away. If I start leaning away from stuff, I keep leaning away. Whereas if I have to find a little bit of bravery every day, and that takes me, my momentum is forwards instead of backwards.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of society and the way we talk about things like anxiety and so on, and wide, more broadly than that, is that it's about comforting and closeting and staying away from things, whereas I think we need to be leaning into things. And adventure is this beautiful, natural way, at your own speed, in your own little tiny steps or big steps, of practicing that, of stretching that muscle. And I think that then that translates back to the rest of your world and your career and your relationships and your life and everything else. It makes us bolder and braver and more capable and more responsible for ourselves and for our planet. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's well, it's a good segue to, you know, the broader thing is that you can have adventures near to home or in the home even, but do you think that there's a connection with adventure outdoors and the fact that we might want to reintegrate back into nature more, well, supports, you know, save the planet's biosphere? You know, I think there's only three things we should be doing: is solving problems, supporting, educating people, and saving the planet's biosphere. So adventure, how does that tie into that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think what's been great about, I've been trying to get this message out for years, and what's been great is that the green therapy, the green days that GPs are even prescribing,
Yeah.
or at least in Britain, that's quite, I know that's not an international thing yet. But this idea that being in nature is good for us, that concept is now quite mainstream in Britain and in America, around the Western world. It's becoming much more mainstream.
And Japan,
And
isn't it, as well?
sorry?
And Japan as well, isn't it? I think they did.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, in some countries it never went away, really.
Right.
But you know, we are the most urbanized country in Europe. So we're kind of behind on most things like this. But it's kind of taken hold, this idea that green is good, that being outside is good, that being in nature is good. So it kind of helped me get, it's definitely been a good platform to accelerate getting this idea that also challenge in nature is good. And that's like nature effect on steroids.
Right.
So that's really helped. I've forgotten the question now. What's the question again?
It's the fact that you know, we've got the mental health and well-being benefits and the resilience and mental toughness that you kind of develop, the robustness of it all from doing adventure. But also, is there another thing that it's actually going to contribute more to people appreciating nature and saving the biosphere?
Oh, yes. Sorry, yes, absolutely. And sorry about that. A blue tit actually landed on the window, and I was just like, "Oh!" and it completely froze my brain. So what I think is that when nature helps you, you want to protect it. You know, when you find it beneficial to you, when it's valuable to you, you're connected to it, and by being connected to it, you're going to value it, and therefore you're going to hopefully get up and do something about it.
Yeah.
I think doing adventures in nature particularly good because I think you'll help more. I think adventures in forests is more beneficial to some people in some situations than forest bathing. I'm not saying forest bathing isn't brilliant, because it is as well, but I think you can ramp up the benefits to some people in some situations. So there's you get even more benefit from it. You get more like joy or whatever it is that you get from this, positive emotions. I think also you become more emboldened and more empowered. What we really have a problem with at the moment is that there's a lot of us, including me, terrified of the future, terrified for our children, terrified of the environmental destruction, and also confused as to why the hell are we in this situation, and why are we still
Yeah,
fracking, and
absolutely.
why has Rishi Sunak just said yes to a whole load more drilling
Yeah.
deals up in the North Sea? Like, why, when all the scientists are saying stop, why on earth are we continuing?
Mm.
So we also need empowerment. We don't just need to be connected and loving of our and wanting to do something. We actually also have to act.
Yes.
And I think because society has made us all so, society makes us kind of lose our responsibility, expect other people to make our decisions. That's how society is constructed, for lots, well, we could get into lots of reasons as to why. But because we're at that, I think adventure really gives us a voice, basically, and it
Mm.
makes us more emboldened. And that's what we really need right now. We don't just need
Yeah.
big ideas, we need big actions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to that word. I came up with this idea about a week or two ago, as the fact, I was having a conversation with someone, another group online. I'm not sure whether it was a group of polymaths or whatever, but one of the things that we were talking about neurodivergence, neurodivergent people, and I kind of I checked recently, how much of the population is neurodivergent. It's about 20% of the people. It's, some people say up to about a fifth of the population of the UK are neurodivergent. Well, perhaps, well, they're not outliers, are they? That's quite a major portion of the society. And I think the problem that why it's a problem with neuro is because society is neuroconvergent. So in order for you to have compete and control, it's kind of Dr. Ian McGilchrist has done this work and said that he's revisited the left brain, right brain thing. And the left brain is more about compete control. And we seem to, in order to control, centralized control, you've got to kind of converge people into widgets that are very much the same. And anyone that doesn't, a kind of a problem. Whereas actually, if we were more tribal, hunter-gatherer, they were always celebrated. People who were neurodivergent were quite often celebrated in egalitarian hunter-gatherer communities, and that's the problem. And as you say, going back to, we're disempowered because society is trying to control us. It's trying to organize us, which is, the control bit. Not trying to control us, but it's just an emergent property of a complex adaptive system if it follows certain rules. And if the rules are compete, be entrepreneurial, make big businesses and control all the resources, hierarchy basically, then obviously this neuroconvergence by society is actually making a problem for people that want to do things differently. So, I mean, to give you an example of what I mean by that is, if you're an adventurer, it should be really easy. If you're doing great stuff, it should be really easy. By society should make it really easy for you to do more of the work. But it doesn't, does it? It makes it really hard work if you don't kind of fit into computer programming or something. Does that make sense?
it does. And what's interesting, I think, is something I didn't put in my book, but I nearly put in, but there's not enough science to, I didn't want anything in my book that I couldn't back up with a really solid set of data. So I put in some of my ideas, my theories, and so on. But something I didn't put in, I pulled out the last minute, because you always, when you write, you just write far too much and then have to slim it down.
Yeah.
And and also because I didn't want to undermine my main argument is that adventure is for everyone, and it's
Yeah.
really important for everyone. I think that there is actually 20% of the population that adventure is even more important for them than the other 80%. And that might be the neurodivergent, or what we label neurodivergent. Of course, that label is useful in some ways for diagnosis. That, I mean, it can be useful for people, but I think that it's much, the way I look at it more is that we have a very unhealthy and unnatural society. So that 20% that don't fit in, as it were, and then neurodivergent, which is such a divergent, well, that's a funny word, isn't it, really? Or maybe not the right word. It's not them that's wrong. It's like the society we built that's wrong, and I think we
Correct.
both agree on that. We built, and I say we because this is, as you say, there's no they sat there kind of there's no one clever enough. There's not some clever set of
Yeah.
billionaires sort of sat somewhere planning this. It's how our evolution has, as society's evolved to this place, where we now have such a weird and unnatural way of living that certain people find it harder to live like that than others. And I think you just have to look at that. The latest stats with children and mental health amongst children, 1 in 6 children in Britain are diagnosed with a mental health condition. You can't start saying what's wrong with those kids. You have to start saying at that point, when it's that many kids, you have to start saying
Yeah,
what is wrong with
absolutely.
society that we have 1 in 6 children diagnosed. So I think we have this massive societal problem, and I think what you're talking about is definitely a big part of it, most of it, and other stuff as well. Um, um, so yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think what's interesting is from my witnessing, from my experience, kids who are having troubles, adults who are having particular types of troubles, people who have drug dependencies, kids who are having trouble at school with kind of behavioural, or they might be called ADHD, or they might have the label ADHD, or they might have a label of being a troublemaker or whatever. Those sorts of people and children very often do so well with adventure.
Yes.
They do so well, and I think that there's a reason for that, and that's probably because their minds, they're the people and the kids in the tribes when we used to live more naturally, that would be the novelty seekers, would be the big ideas people, the inventors. You know, when it goes right, they become the entrepreneurs and the inventors and the people who go into space and stuff. But when it goes wrong, they get, yeah, which it mostly does, because of society, then it becomes a burden. So yeah, I don't know. We need to put all those. But yeah, adventure is particularly good, I think, for particular people.
Mm. Yeah, from my own experience, it's I was rubbish at school, you know, ran away and joined the military. And by the time I was 21, I'd worked with the E-bands in Brunei. I'd been on an expedition to the Himalayas, around the foothills of Kachinjunga, you know, Fiji, Guam, all these amazing places, and took to it like a duck to water. But I only ran away to the army because of a dysfunctional childhood. But my childhood was spent in nature, running away from home, spending trying to spend as much time in nature as possible, sort of thing. But yeah, I later went back and did a degree in environmental studies, and because it was more about different things, politics, geology, geography, environment, ecology, but you know, lots of different things, it suited me. And then later on, a lady who coaches polymath said, "Oh, you're a polymath, that's what it is." And she just made sense of my world. My world has always been, my life has always been 3 years of getting involved in that psychology, and then 3 years in philosophy, and then 3 years and doing these things for 3 years at a time. And yeah, so someone going to, that's what I mean about the fact that one thing I've seen is when working with children in the outdoors is that what are labeled the troublemakers tend to be the leaders when it comes to the outdoors. They just suddenly,
It's
that's where they
so
belong.
true, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone who I work with who works with kids in the outdoors, kids who might be having trouble, or whatever, or kids, any kind of kid, or kids who are quiet in class and not really getting any attention, they're suddenly, their light comes on, and that, yeah. And it's funny, actually. I mean, slight digression, but I think there's a lot of, because of the breakdown of society, I think there's a lot of childhood trauma.
Mm.
There's a lot of dysfunctional childhoods, more than there ever has been, because within a tribal system, everyone would support the parents, or
Yes.
the wider family, or the children, whoever's having the, so these things wouldn't happen. What I have found, although I mean, I was never going to put this in the book because I definitely don't have data on this, but what I have found working as a professional explorer, expedition leader for many years, is that a huge proportion of outdoor leaders, especially expedition leaders, have got a very dysfunctional childhood. And yeah, so I totally relate to that idea of running away into nature
Mm.
because stuff at home is just too much, because there's a therapy to being in nature and a therapy to freedom of adventuring in nature. So,
Mm.
and I think that calls us to it or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's maybe for another
Yeah.
another discussion, but it's really interesting.
Mm. So if there's people listening to this and listening to being inspired by what you're saying, which I'm sure they will be, how, maybe how would people get into this? How would people be able to follow in a similar kind of footsteps as to you? What advice would you give them?
What you mean, just doing some adventures, getting out and doing some adventures,
Well,
or working in it? Which do you mean?
working in it and getting out in it, where would they start, do you think?
Well, start small, I think, and start with something that calls to you. Start authentically, or just start with the easiest opportunity you can get. But I think the first hurdle is the biggest hurdle. I was sort of talking about that idea of feedback earlier. Once you've had a taste,
Mm.
unless it's been absolutely mismanaged and it's a total disaster, which it might be a bit of a disaster and a bit mismanaged, but as long as you didn't feel terribly at risk, and it didn't go terribly wrong, you will try something and you will feel excited by it and you'll want to do it again and you'll feel emboldened and so on and so forth. So the first step is the hardest one, and if you can just find the courage and the resource to start, do something you want to do. If you can, if there's something that calls to you, you might have heard about, might be an organized long walk, or it might be a camp out with some other people that you can join or something. But do something that calls to you, I think, because not everyone's into climbing and not everyone's into cold water swimming or whatever, but you find your fit, and then just try and just commit to doing it. Commit, if I think for me, the more I reasoned, I'm a very logically focused, I'm sort of logical driven as well as emotionally driven. I think stories and hearing about it, the emotional part helps, but also logical part helps for me. So for me, it was about understanding how important adventuring is. When I became a parent, and that was a big barrier 6 years ago, to like trying to live because I've always lived adventurously, and it's really hard with a little one and trying to figure out how to do that. Because I had that logic, because I'd just written a book and I could follow my own, or I was writing a book and I could follow my own advice. I knew that it had to be a central part of our family as well, and it wasn't just something that I used to do in my past. It had to be. It'd always been very powerful for me, and I knew that it would be something I needed to keep going with. So I'm digressing a bit. We've got a bird table at the moment and loads of birds keep landing on the window. We're very lucky. We live in the middle of Exmoor, so it's pretty cool. We have pretty cool birds. Just a great spotted woodpecker just landed. So how do you get started? Start small. This is really important. You have to start with something you believe you're going to be able to achieve, just to get to the start line. Find other people. That's really good. There's loads of Facebook groups and meetup groups nowadays. You can find a meetup group that does wild swimming in your local area, or a meetup group that goes climbing in your local area. Or there's climbing clubs and stuff like that. There's something very, very powerful about having community around you. So there's lots of things you can go. And I list some things in my book, and there's ideas all over the place about adventures that you can start off with. And then if you want to work in adventure, I think you have to, well, it depends where you are in your career. It's quite a hard question. If you're starting out, then go and get all the tickets, go and get all the qualifications. There's all sorts of ways of doing that. There's 0 to hero courses that you can do a whole year at a activity centre and get lots and lots of tickets. It's a great way of trying out different types of disciplines. Climbing, canoeing, kayaking, whatever it is. You can figure out what it is that you like to do, or you feel an affinity with. If you're already in another job and you've already done another career and you want to change career, I would say a key part of it is transferable skills. So much of outdoor and adventure work is about leading. It's about leadership and about teamwork and about understanding about managing people. So if you've, I run an expedition leadership course actually a couple of times a year, and I have a lot of people who transfer across from other careers. And a key part of it is pointing out that they've already got loads of management experience, and the expedition companies and so on out there, they want people who can deal with people, because that is any real big adventure or small adventure, really. Any team will fail or succeed depending on how the people and the relationships work. So I don't know. There's a few ideas to get going with, whether you're kicking off or changing career.
Well, that's been that's great. I'll put some links at the bottom of this when it goes on YouTube, and I'll put a picture of your book and let people find where that is. It's been a very I know a lot of my crowd, or the people that I hang out with, will be very interested to hear about all this. So thanks for the conversation.